A man froze to death wearing the heaviest wool coat Europe had ever woven. A few miles away, on the same night, under the same storm, a child slept soundly beneath a thin sheet of animal skin. One of them died, one of them didn't. So what killed the man in the coat, and what saved the child in the hide? The answer is not what you expect, and it has almost nothing to do with warmth. Most people imagine winter survival as a war against temperature. The indigenous peoples of North America understood something far stranger. Temperature was only one number in a much larger equation. A dry day at 20 below zero could be safer than a wet day just above freezing. Modern physics eventually explained why. Water pulls heat out of the human body many times faster than air ever could. Once clothing turns damp, insulation collapses. The warm air held inside the fibers is replaced by moisture, and the body begins burning itself alive just to keep going. Indigenous hunters learned this generations before anyone had invented a thermometer. So they reversed the rule entirely. They were not trying to stay warm. They were trying to stay dry. Warmth was the reward. Dryness was the law. And that single idea reshaped everything. A hunter climbing a ridge would deliberately slow his pace. A man carrying a heavy load would shed a layer before he felt hot, not after. Because sweat was never just discomfort. Sweat was an open door, and winter always walked through it. This was not a clever trick. It was discipline, passed down like a prayer. Children in the frozen north were taught the strangest lesson imaginable. Do not let yourself get warm. It sounded like madness. It kept a people alive for thousands of years. The Europeans arrived carrying wool, fire, and pride. The people already living there carried something that weighed nothing at all. And that was the thing that kept them breathing. We will come back to it, because by the end of this story, you will understand why it was the only thing that ever truly mattered. To a European eye, a deer hide shirt looked like poverty, something a man wore because he had nothing better. In truth, it was one of the most advanced materials on the continent, and it took centuries of failure to invent. The process began with a hide, cleaned by hand until nothing remained but the raw structure of the skin. Then came the oils, drawn from the animal's own tissue, worked in slowly until the collagen fibers softened, and the skin began to move like cloth instead of armor. But the real transformation happened over smoke. The hide was suspended above a slow, smoldering fire, sometimes for hours, while smoke crept deep into every fiber. Modern chemistry has only recently caught up to what those hands already knew. Compounds inside wood smoke bind to collagen and stabilize it, so the fibers no longer lock together and harden as they dry. The result was almost unfair. Ordinary leather died when it got wet. Smoked buckskin only came back. Ordinary garments turned to boards after a single rain. Smoked buckskin kept working. And then there was the part that mattered most. The part nobody outside that world understood. It breathed. Moisture rising off the body could pass straight through the material and escape into the air, instead of gathering inside the clothing and turning against the person wearing it. Think about what that means. Thousands of years before anyone laminated a membrane into a jacket and sold it as a miracle, these people had already solved waterproof and breathable at the same time, using nothing but an animal, a fire, and patience. So ask yourself one question as we go. Whose hands made this? Hold on to that question. The answer is not the one you are expecting, because the material was only half of the invention. The genius was in how it was worn. Warmth does not come from fabric. Warmth comes from air. Still air trapped against the skin insulates. Moving air steals heat and gives nothing back. The entire challenge of winter is controlling which of those two is happening to you. So the clothing came apart. Separate leggings, separate shirts, robes, outer layers, each one adjustable, each one removable. All of it loose enough that blood kept reaching the fingers and toes, and the pockets of trapped air stayed intact. A man climbing a ridge would open his collar and let the heat pour out before the sweat ever formed. The wind would turn, and he would close it again without breaking stride. All day long, adjusting, venting, sealing, reading. It was a conversation, held in silence, between a body and the sky. They did not endure winter. They negotiated with it. But even the most perfect clothing on earth has one place it cannot save you. The place where the body meets the ground. The secret that stunned European observers was not fur, It was grass. The moccasin may be the most misunderstood piece of technology in North American history. From the outside, it looks like nothing. A soft skin wrapped around a foot. No sole, no structure, no protection. But the softness was the point. It let the foot move the way a foot is built to move, which kept the blood flowing, which kept the toes alive. And the real invention was never visible from the outside at all, because it was hidden inside. Dry grass, moss, shredded plant fiber, bison wool, packed around the foot. These created thousands of tiny pockets of still air, and at the same time they drank the sweat straight out of the skin. And here is the part that still humbles engineers. When the packing got wet, it came out. You pulled it, threw it away, and replaced it with a fresh handful, right there in the snow, for free, from a landscape that offered it everywhere. Compare that to the most expensive boot on the market today. Once it soaks through on the inside, you have no move left. You carry that water for the rest of the day, and the water carries the heat out of you. They solved in a handful of dried grass what modern footwear still has not solved with billions of dollars. So foot care became a ritual, performed every single night, and it was never really about feet. A mother would take her child's foot in her hands before sleep and check it the way you would check a heartbeat, looking for the pale skin, the numbness, the first quiet signal that something was going wrong. Because warm feet meant walking. Walking meant reaching the next camp. Reaching the next camp meant living. In that world, love was rarely spoken out loud. It was packed into a shoe, with a handful of dry grass. And now, the question I asked you to hold. Whose hands made all of this? Not the hunter, not the warrior, not the chief in the photograph on your wall. The smoked hides, the stitching, the layered garments, the liners, the grass packed into a child's moccasin at dusk. Overwhelmingly, this was the work of women. The most advanced materials industry in pre-industrial North America was designed, tested, refined, and taught by people whose names appear in no history book, in no treaty, on no monument. We remember the men who rode. We forgot the women who made it possible for anyone to ride at all. And that same intelligence built the shelter. Few structures are more recognizable than the Tipi, and almost nobody understands what they are looking at. The cone is not a shape. It is aerodynamics. Wind does not slam into a teepee the way it slams into a flat wall. It slides around it, and the structure holds. Inside, there was a second skin. An inner liner hung around the perimeter, creating a sealed gap of air between the living space and the outer cover. Cold air entered low. Warm air rose. Smoke climbed and escaped through flaps at the top that could be adjusted as the wind turned. It was never a tent. It was a machine for surviving the sky. But even that machine needed one more thing. And this is exactly where most modern people get it completely wrong. Fire. Every newcomer to that country made the same mistake, and it seemed like the most reasonable mistake in the world. They built the fire bigger. More flames, more heat, more safety. It feels obvious. It is also wrong. A large fire does not warm a man evenly. It roasts the front of him while the back of him freezes in the same minute. So he stands there turning like meat on a spit, never actually warm, only alternating. It throws most of its heat into the empty sky. It devours fuel, which means it devours hours, which means someone has to go back out into the cold, hauling wood, working hard, breathing heavy. And a big fire doesn't just waste wood. It makes you sweat. And by now, you already know exactly what sweat does. This is why indigenous peoples so often built the opposite of what you would expect. Small fires, controlled fires. Enough to cook, enough to hold heat close to the body, enough to keep the smoke thin and the fuel lasting. And then they did something genuinely brilliant with the heat they had already paid for. They put stones next to the flames and let them drink the energy. Rock holds heat long after wood has surrendered it. Wrapped in hide, tucked into a robe, laid beside a sleeping child, those stones became batteries. Ancient, silent, perfect. The fire went out. The warmth did not. But no fire on earth can heat a body that has nothing left to burn. Cold is a tax, and it is collected constantly. Every breath, every step, every shiver, every heartbeat pulls fuel out of the system. And in deep winter, a human being can burn through calories at a rate that would frighten most modern people. So the winter diet turned hard toward fat and protein. And out of that need came one of the most effective survival foods ever created: pemmican, dried meat, pounded down, rendered fat, poured in. Sometimes berries, folded through. Sealed and stored, it could last for years without spoiling. It carried almost no water weight, and it delivered dense, immediate energy to a body working at the edge of its limit. And here is the part of the story that history quietly swallowed. The Europeans came to this continent convinced they had arrived to teach these people how to live. Within a few generations, their fur brigades, their trading companies, and eventually their celebrated Arctic expeditions were running on pemmican. They were buying it, depending on it, crossing frozen worlds on the strength of it. The salvation of the conqueror came packaged by the conquered. And that food was never really food. It was storage. They took the energy of an animal that had died, and they poured it into the endurance of a human being who intended to live. And still, none of it explains the hardest question of all. Because you can give two men the same clothing, the same fire, the same meal, and send them into the same storm, one of them walks home, the other one does not. Why? The answer is that the last battle of winter is not fought on the skin, it is fought behind the eyes. Fear accelerates mistakes. Panic burns energy a man cannot spare. Despair dismantles judgment before the body has even started to fail. Indigenous survival culture understood all of this long before anyone wrote it down as psychology. And so children were trained, from the time they could walk, to replace panic with observation, and to replace fear with preparation. Winter was dangerous, but danger becomes something you can work with the moment you actually understand it. Cold kills the body slowly. Fear kills the judgment first. And a man with ruined judgment is already gone, no matter how good his coat is. Which is exactly why nobody was ever meant to face it alone. Out on the trail, in the storm, people watched each other, constantly, looking for the stumble, the slurred word, the pale patch on a cheek, the strange cheerfulness that arrives just before a person stops making sense. Because here is the cruelty of freezing. The man who is going down is the last man to know it. His own mind is the first thing the cold takes, which means he cannot be the one to notice. He needs someone else to look at his face. In their world, being watched over was not a comfort. It was infrastructure. It was survival equipment, made of other people. And I wonder, sometimes, whether we gave that up faster than we gave up the moccasins. Whether we built a world where a man can go down slowly, in a warm room, and nobody looks at his face. And that same attention, turned outward, became the closest thing they had to a forecast. Cloud shape, wind direction, the way birds shifted their movement hours before anything visible changed. The behavior of animals, the sound snow made underfoot, and how it packed, and how it didn't. These were not superstitions. This was data, gathered across tens of thousands of hours, and passed down through generations. And it bought them the most valuable thing in winter: time. Time to gather wood, time to build, time to turn back before the sky closed. Modern instruments predict the storm. They predicted it too, with nothing but attention. So now we come back to it. The thing they carried that weighed nothing at all. It was never the smoked buckskin. It was never the tipi, or the grass in the moccasin, or the pemmican in the pack. It was the knowledge itself, and more than that, the fact that the knowledge was shared. Behind every single one of these inventions stand hundreds of generations who got it wrong, who suffered for it, who died for it, who remembered, and who told someone. That is what they were carrying. A million small lessons, paid for in lives, handed forward for free. And look at what that knowledge chose to do. Clothing worked with moisture instead of trapping it. Shelter worked with the wind instead of fighting it. Food worked with biology instead of against it. Knowledge worked with time instead of pretending to outrun it. The cold was never their enemy. It never hated them. It simply told the truth about who had been paying attention and who had not. They did not conquer winter. They stopped arguing with it. And that is the difference between enduring your life and actually living it. And we dig up the forgotten skills, the buried technologies, and the hard-won wisdom that let people survive where the rest of the world said no one could. So tell me two things before you go. Which of these surprised you most? And then this one, which I really do want to hear. What did your grandparents know how to do that nobody alive still knows? Leave it below. Write their name, because knowledge only survives if someone tells it. And right now, that someone is you.